I have to note, and people have noted this to me all day, we're a very gender kind of conforming group here. What is it about, I want to thank the handful of men who are in the room who care about this lecture. Thank you for coming. But, we'd like to get more of your gender involved in that. So if you can spread the word that we're open to more help, we definitely like some more dyslexia warriors in our camp. Today I'm really so excited about the panel that we have here because it's such a diverse expertise is being represented. And we're going to talk about advocacy. When we had our panel last year, or we had one of the things that people asked at the end was, what can we do? How can we help? How can we make change? And we hadn't really moved that far to think about what can we do to change laws in Pennsylvania? How can we move forward to make things better? So today I'm really happy to have some people who have some ideas about how to make change, who've been involved in making change, and can give us some direction to do that. I will mention that at 4 p.m. we will be having kind of a strategic session on advocacy. So if you want to talk more after the panel, we'll have the question and answer here, but we'll probably have to cut that short to go over to the 2 o'clock sessions. So if you want more talk and you want more information about advocacy, come to the 4 o'clock panel. And I'll also be sending out an email with some more information that comes out of that panel to everybody who went to the conference. So today, let me introduce Angela Kirby, who is the director of PATAG, the PA Training and Technical Assistance Network. She's going to be giving a session on PA Act 69 this afternoon, and she's also going to be involved in the advocacy session. We have Daphne Liliana, who is from the Dyslexia and Literacy Network, and she was instrumental in getting PA Act 69 passed. Daphne? Holly Woodard, who is the PAECT Advocacy Chair and 2018 and 2019 Peaceful and Technology Star Lead Learner. So she's got a lot of credentials in the classroom and a lot of ideas about how to help our dyslexic learners. And then last but not least, Rebecca Warner, who's from Decoding Dyslexia VA, and she created the PVD. Oh boy, you get me every time. The PQBD symbol that even non-dyslexic people can mess up, and it's the beautiful insignia symbol that you see around on the necklaces and T-shirts. Please, thank you so much for allowing people with dyslexia to represent in such a beautiful way. So I'm just going to ask to start off, how did you become involved with thinking about dyslexia, with dealing with issues about dyslexia, and how did your concern develop over the years? And we'll start with, start with you, Angela.
So thank you very much, and I just want to give a shout out to Dr. Peg Kay, who is probably one of the reasons 20-some years ago I got really passionate about dyslexia. I was a learning support teacher in Manheim Township School District, which is here in Lancaster County. And at that time, the district had just hired me. I had come from one of the very few master's programs at that time in Pennsylvania that was actually teaching the science of reading. We had been given a lot of grounding in kind of explicit systematic instruction, so we really did have a strong understanding in that program of kind of phonological awareness and decoding and encoding. But was that not at that time, so I left that program, and a woman by the name of Dr. Randy O'Connor was the doctoral program chair for that program, and so she had done a lot of research in early literacy, and so I was lucky to have her as a professor, but I never heard of multisensory structured language or Gillingham. I was hired by Manheim Township, and every contentious case they ended up getting, I ended up being the teacher that they assigned to the parents that were suing the district. And a lot of those parents were suing because Dr. Kay had done an evaluation. And she had done an evaluation, and she kept saying, I really recommend this multisensory structured approach. And I was like, well, how does that fit in the research? I wasn't really familiar with Orton Gillingham-based programs, but was familiar with the science. And so it became natural. I became a Wilson trainer and teacher, and I credit a lot of that to the advocacy in getting those independent educational evaluations from Dr. Kay, and then getting that training. And since then, I've really been passionate about this work and been passionate about the kids that I served over the years where in 3rd and 4th grade when someone systematically taught them their sounds and they said to me crying in 4th grade, why didn't somebody teach me this 5 years ago? So I'm passionate about it and I'm excited to be on this panel with folks and talk to you about the supports and services the Department of Education is trying to push out across the Commonwealth.
Hello, how are you guys? How are we doing? Everybody smiling? Good tuna fish sandwich today? We good? Good stuff? There's a carrot cake. There's still some in the back. That's our goal. We're going to finish out that table. That's what we're going to do. We're going to heal together. We're going to eat carrot cake. That's why we're here. So my name is Holly Woodard, and I am a high school English teacher. I've been teaching for about 25 years. I teach in Council Rock School District, which is in Lower Bucks County between Philadelphia and Trenton. And I got my start in education working as a teaching assistant in the special education classroom. And for years, I led my class with an extreme sense of confidence, almost to the point of arrogance, that I was getting it right for my special education students. I was very pleased with the work that I was doing in my class. And then the universe actually gave me a special education child. And then I realized, wow, there's so much I did not know. So I have a son that is now 14 years old that was born with multiple disabilities. He's born with a physical disability. He has had multiple surgeries to overcome that. And he's got ADHD, he's got dyslexia, he's got dysgraphia, he's the package. I mean, you name it. He's got the anxiety, he's got all of it. And the one that really, really causes the most issues for him was dyslexia. And as an educator, once I started to realize how wrong we're getting it, I became very impassioned by it. And I'm at the point we had to litigate to get some support for him, and he's doing well. He's doing on grade level. He's in his 8th marking period of honor roll, which I didn't think that was ever going to happen. I have to brag. I'm sorry. It's not a subtle flex. It's a hard flex for my son. But I'm at the point where I've healed. I've healed through some of the pain and the frustration and anger, and I really kind of want to utilize this knowledge of public education and what I'm doing in my day life, and kind of marry it with what I'm dealing with at home, with my personal life, and try to make it better for all of us. And we need to do it. So thank you guys for being here, and let's make a plan. Okay. You weren't going to share it anyway.
My name is Rebecca, and I'm with Decoding Dyslexia Virginia, and I started a PQBD, and also dyslexiasymbol.com. And I do not have any letters behind my name, and I'm not a teacher, I'm a parent. And my advocacy voice is coming from that parent perspective, and I am trying to reach all the parents that were me. When I found out my son was dyslexic, I knew his dad was, but he was fine, right? And I started, the first meeting in kindergarten, they said he was going to have to repeat kindergarten. And I was like, well, how do you repeat fail kindergarten? And I remember saying, they said, well, we're calling him for reading now. And I remember saying, well, I didn't know about that. They said, legally, we don't have to tell you. And I remember thinking, like, okay, I didn't know that was going to go there. So what started a journey for my family with my son, who's pretty severely dyslexic. And Decoding Dyslexia Virginia started in my living room. It's a fabulous group of supporters, and you will hear me say time and time again how much I lean on them and how I encourage all of you to connect with your Decoding Dyslexia Pennsylvania folks. But so my real job as an artist was I created jewelry for Prevent Child Abuse America, the Martin Luther King Foundation, National Cherry Blossom Festival, and immediately I was like, oh, we need a piece of art to get behind this. And so the dyslexia symbol is my contribution to raise awareness and funding and be something we can all get behind.
Hello, my name is Daphne Juliana. I call myself an accidental advocate. I'm dyslexic. I have 3 dyslexic children. We all have ADHD as well. We've diagnosed my husband. We are really an interesting, loud, obnoxious family lots of times. But I was diagnosed late in high school, and I sort of put it aside and went on to college. It took me a long time, and I struggled, but I got here. My first job out of college was working on a statewide judicial campaign, and that's literally because I was knocking on doors to find jobs in business and ended up with this job because somebody knew somebody, and that sort of turned my life into this direction of politics. And I got older, I just stopped doing that because I was actually getting too old. And my kids needed me a little more. And in the meantime, I met my husband, who was a state representative, state senator. He ran for Congress, lost, and now has his own lobbying business. He knows nothing about education, so he rarely is able to help me on doing too many things, but he's been incredibly supportive. But when I stopped doing my consulting business, I started to look around and was reading articles about what was happening in Ohio or what was going on in New Jersey. And so I reached out to the Pennsylvania branch of the International Dyslexia Association here in Pennsylvania and said, hey, I did this work in politics, and I'd be interested in helping you if you're trying to do some legislative stuff. So long story short, a lot of us got together, and it was a mix of people. So people from the early decoding dyslexia in Pennsylvania, myself, who didn't really have any association to other people involved with PBIDA, and some other professionals, and started talking, meeting monthly. But at the end of it, it came down to about 3 or 4 of us that really focused on the legislation. Representative Ed Nielsen, who is from Northeast Philadelphia, he's a Democrat, has a dyslexic son, and he had met one of the decoding dyslexia parents in Pennsylvania, and she brought him to one of our meetings, and that's how we started to work with him, and we've had a really great relationship with him. And we just worked the resources, some of my contacts, some of the other folks who were with his contacts, and we're able to slowly but surely get some legislation passed. It was probably one of the most humbling things that I've choked up about, and to see that we got to go to the schools, and we also, I can talk later about, we got an extension, so it's going for 2 more years. And then the department itself expanded it, so they added more districts in. And so that was so gratifying to see that it was this little project that these annoying parents insisted on passing, and now is hopefully turning into something bigger and something greater, and that will slowly move across the state of Pennsylvania. It's a start, and you will hear me many times say, this is a long process. Nothing happens overnight, and you have to really, have perseverance and stick with it. This change does happen, and I think we're seeing a lot of it now.
I'm going to ask some questions, and I'm going to call out one of the members on the panel to start. Sometimes panel members, like the first one, is about challenges in PA, and I know that Rebecca's in Virginia, so she may not know those challenges. So all the panelists don't have to comment on each question, so feel free to pass if you're not interested and you don't feel like you have much to add. But my first question is, what challenges does PA face in creating a more supportive environment for dyslexic students? And what would your advice be for addressing those challenges? And I'm going to start with Angela.
Yeah, first of all, I think knowledge as to the funding systems across Pennsylvania, because when all of this comes down to it, comes down to resources and then professional development and training, right? So I think for folks to understand, there are 29 intermediate units across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. The Department of Education funds 5 full-time equivalents in every one of those intermediate units. Of those 5 full-time equivalents, at least one is an expert in literacy. And when I say that, I am saying that the Department of Education has spent over the last 12 years hundreds of thousands of dollars getting those folks trained in a program called Language Essentials for Teaching Reading and Spelling. It's an evidence-based professional development model. And if you've been following Emily Hanford in American Public Media, you'll see Mississippi's data recently, and they're crediting letters training for teachers as one of the reasons that they were able to achieve the results that they did. So first thing is that you have a system in Pennsylvania where you have 29 intermediate units, and there's folks funded fully by the Department of Education to provide free training and technical assistance to school districts in your areas. People don't necessarily know that. You need to know that. In addition, there are 3 patents, Pennsylvania Training and Technical Assistance Network. I'm the director of the Harrisburg office, and my office leads the statewide literacy initiative. Our role and responsibility for the last 10 to 12 years, we rolled out with Louisa Moat's letters in 2004 and have been subsequently supporting that. Additionally, when Daphne and her team got Act 69 and then the subsequent extension work, our folks have been working side by side with them on that training. So everything that comes from patent is free, and it's free to teachers, it's free to administrators, it's free to parents. but folks sometimes don't recognize that. And that's a huge resource that you have available. All of those parents can attend sessions, teachers can attend sessions, and we encourage parents to attend those sessions. Because once parents are equipped, they're able to ask really good questions when they go into those districts. So I would start with saying funding and looking at the resources. There's a system that's been supported. The resources that supported Act 69 came from that system. Now, unfortunately, the resources that supported it are federal funds through Individuals with Disability Education Act to prevent kids from being identified. And we know that we need to start working on general education stepping up to the plate because this isn't about special ed. But the reality is that under IDEA 2004, up to 15% of the special ed allocation that goes to your districts can be used to prevent kids from being identified as kids with disabilities. And so when your districts are saying, well, we don't have the resources, or we don't do this, that, and the other, you need to be able to advocate for that. You know that 15% of their IDEA dollars can go to prevent kids from being identified. And those resources are the resources that are supporting Act 69 and the expansion. Those resources are the resources that support Patents Literacy Initiative. Those resources are the resources that are supporting training and consultation staff in every one of your intermediate units. Knowing that hopefully will help you do advocacy because it really comes down to that. Dr. Kay mentioned earlier about being afraid of the word dyslexia. And I'm going to tell you that was the case, and that was the language teachers were being and administrators were being trained in. And it wasn't until parent advocacy and in the, I believe, fall of 2016, the Obama administration put out a Dear Colleague letter, of which we have posted on Patent's website, where it clearly says districts, you can say the word dyslexia. It is a subtype of reading disabilities, and you need to be able to identify the needs, and as Dr. Kay mentioned, figure out what specially designed instruction is going to work for those individual students. So again, take that Dear Colleague letter from U.S. Department of Education, and when they say you can't say dyslexia, hand them that. It's from the U.S. Department of Education, and it says that dyslexia is a type of reading disability.
Well, that was very passionate. Thank you very much. I learned a lot. That was great. I couldn't even keep up with the notes, so the guy's recording in the back, so. Jared. So I'm going to actually go in a different direction in reference to some of the challenges. I agree, what she was saying, but I want to take it from an educational standpoint where I spend my day. I'm an English teacher. Like, my job is to work in English. Like, kids come to my room and they read, and then they write, and then I assess them, then I give them a degree, and I send them on their way. I have never taken a course in language-based disabilities. It was not part of my undergraduate degree. When I got my master's degree, it was not part of it. It was not part of my certification. Now, when I started working on my second master's degree, I was like, I'm going to now start taking classes on this, and I just took a bunch of classes on education law, but that was just because now I had a child, but not at any point in time was it required for me. When I got my certification, I had to pass a grammar and a math test as part of the state certification. Now, ask me how often I use math in my English class. 0. Ask me how often I need to utilize my information regarding special education. Well, I could use my math skills that I learned for the certification to figure that out. It is a lot, guys. And the reality is that this is not a reading problem. This is not a K-3 problem. This is something that every single curricular area in every single high school in Pennsylvania is using. And college, yeah. And from the AP class down to the basic reading level classes that I see in my buildings, there are dyslexic students. And there's an arrogance among teachers that if they don't teach that area, they don't need to know it. There's an ignorance among administrators that this is just a small portion of our school that doesn't really impact our standings. So why are we going to we'll throw a ton of money at our AP kids because they're going to drive our scores up. But we're not necessarily doing what we need to do for the most vulnerable students. So there is a definite problem at the educational level. Now, here's what I can tell you is that teachers innately are awesome people. And the moment you tell them that this is a real thing and this is what it looks like, and that these kids are now more vulnerable for suicide and addiction and all the things that they worry about for their students, they kind of go like, whoa, wait a second, what? Reading is linked to that? And it's like, yeah. And then they get on board, and they get fired up, and then they want to learn more. And I saw a lot of people shaking their heads, because I know just from shaking your head that there are teachers in this room that may not have children themselves, but they have kids, they have students that are here, that are dealing with this, so they're here to learn more. So I believe that a major problem that we can overcome is perhaps providing more instruction before they get their degree, before they get certified for teachers. And then also, I would love to see it linked towards certification, that every single curricular area, the teacher has to prove proficiency in all of the disabilities, ADHD, anxiety, all of these things. I mean, we're doing a lot more social emotional learning and trauma-informed practices. So I think that should be linked to certification. And if we educate the teachers, change occurs. That's where it's at. The teachers are the ones that are going to go and complain to administrators. Administrators are going to be the ones that are going to talk to the superintendent. Superintendent's going to go and talk to the school board, gets the money, and then we make change. So that's where I see. Do you want to comment on Pennsylvania? Oh, no, you don't want my mic.
I'm going to steal the mic for 1 second, because even though I have not done a deep dive in Pennsylvania, I have done a deep dive in Virginia, and I've done enough global advocacy to know that we're all kind of telling the same story. I was in Japan. I talked to trying to get the Coding Dyslexia Africa going. We've got provinces in Canada, and we all have the same story. So I think I'm hearing from the untrained teachers and the need for legislation. And I think the one message I want to say is that I think we can all learn from each other. And that's one piece that with Decoding Dyslexia, we're trying to lean on each other a little bit more. And I wanted to invite you all to go to the Department of Education in Virginia on their website. One of the laws we passed was attached to the teacher licensures, they have to watch a 30-minute module about just simply what is the definition of dyslexia, what are the indicators of dyslexia, and what is some of the current programs that could be used to remediate dyslexia. That doesn't mean kids, it's like, okay, now everybody turn to page 12 and start reading. But this is maybe a first step, and it's public knowledge. I mean, when I went to Japan, I'm like, check this out in Virginia. I mean, it's the World Wide Web, and the one thing we do have now that we didn't have 20 or 30 years ago is Facebook and the internet. We didn't have the ability to just talk with each other on a global level. So even though what's happening here in Pennsylvania might be different than what's happening in Virginia or in Africa and Japan, it's really kind of still the same story. That we need teachers trained, we need scientific evidence to back us up with how they're trained, and we need to identify these kids and give them what they need, or we have anxiety and
Okay, I'll be brief. I wrote down some quick notes. One, I always believe advocacy has to start with awareness, the general awareness. What is dyslexia? What does it look like? And not just with teachers, but with pediatricians and with nurses and with anybody who basically has any interaction with young children. And there are a lot of people, physical therapists, speech and language therapists. And so that's, first of all, I think one of the biggest things that we have to really work on, maybe, and that's maybe that's more of a parent-driven initiative. I know we're trying to do some stuff with the network around that. But also, Angela touched on this a little bit. General education and special education, especially at the state level, work in silos. They don't talk to each other. They told us that 7 years ago when we started on this adventure of this pilot program. I feel like it might be a little better now, but I don't know how much better. And I think that happens in the districts. And that has to stop. This pilot sits under special education. And it's really a general education pilot, and that's where it should go. But that's where we found the people that were sympathetic to what we were trying to do and that understood it. So that was great, but now it needs to move over to the general ed and get funding through that. The other thing I'd have to say about schools of higher ed, there's no checks and balances, and I think this is a problem that I'd love, if anybody has thoughts and suggestions, maybe we can talk about it this afternoon, is that it's the chair of that one department that drives what those teachers and how they're taught and what they're taught. But there's no check and balance there, right? Elected officials get elected, not elected, you get kicked out, parents complain on the school board level. I don't know, when you have a department chair that isn't teaching the science of reading to teachers, how do you get rid of them, right? I always go back to money, right? And so unless we can prove to the colleges that school districts aren't hiring these teachers that are from your program because their teachers aren't equipped, maybe that's the route to go. I don't know, but I don't know how you come up with those numbers. I just think that's another really big problem. So that person can sit there, doesn't have to pay attention to anything, right? He's tenured, he's there, he, she, whomever. So that's sort of my commentary.
Start with Holly. What changes, specific changes, do you think need to be made in our classrooms to support our dyslexic students better?
Are you talking about general ed classrooms or like elementary or just in general? Okay, I think a ton of professional development should be drained into this. Just about when I'm in we have what's called an IPC, it's like the room where all the teachers are kind of hanging out, and every complaint that I hear my colleagues make, in my head I'm like, it's linked to a need not being met. It's linked to a need not being met. Whether it's they're not engaged in the curriculum because they can't, or there's some sort of emotional trauma that they don't realize is there, some sort of invisible backpack that the kid's carrying with them in the classroom. So one of the things I think we need to do is really make teachers aware of how much, first of all, how many, number one. I always use the statistic that you know more people with blue eyes, you know more dyslexics than you know people with blue eyes. That does not mean that someone with blue eyes has dyslexia, because then they look at me and they're like, oh, this is personal. And I'm like, yeah, it is, but for different reasons. So I think we have to let them know just how many it is. I think we have to show them what it looks like in a classroom, how it manifests in a classroom. You know, you're obsessing about this kid not taking notes. You know, maybe he can't. And are you assessing whether or not the knowledge is occurring? You're obsessing that they're not annotating. Maybe the annotations don't help because you're putting so many words in that head right then and there. And I think what we need to do is really invest in professional development in the classroom. We also have to drive empathy up with teachers. There's a lot on teachers' plates, and they're shutting down, guys. There's a teacher shortage. I mean, my job it's a great job. I get to work with cool high school kids like all day and learn like all the cool lingo. And I get summers off, and I know all the cool fashions, and yet we still can't get people to come into schools and teach. I mean, that's a problem. So we need to figure out a way to take some stuff off of teachers' plates, and then allow them to really kind of get centered again about what it was that they wanted to teaching in the first place, which is the love of the kids and making a difference. I mean, the dyslexic kid is literally the kid they got into teaching for. I mean, that was, the vision, when they saw themselves on the white horse saving the day, it's to help the dyslexic child. And a lot of my colleagues have gotten disenfranchised and kind of moved away from the whole point. So I think we need to redevelop empathy with our teachers. I think we need to provide professional development with them. And I think that our parents are critical in that we have to find a way to heal this anger and this divide and this us versus them, because they need to know your narrative. I mean, they need to know what it's like to sit down and do homework with a kid who's spent. And then they need to know that when you're in there and you're advocating for a specific reading program, you're not advocating for a specific reading program, you're advocating so your child doesn't commit suicide. That's what you're advocating. You're in for the fight for your life. And and teachers don't see that. They don't know what happens when you get home with your child. And I would really love to try to find a way to bridge that gap and make the empathy piece come in. And again, a lot of this is just all emotions, and teachers aren't bad people. They will do the right thing. You just have to tell them what it is and show them how to get there.
How have you advocated for dyslexia awareness or changes to how schools address students with dyslexia in PA or in your home states? What ways have been successful?
We can't hear you. Oh, I turned off the mic. I'm sorry.
How have you advocated for dyslexia awareness or changes to how schools address students with dyslexia in PA or in your home states? What methods have been successful for creating some changes in laws?
We'll start with that.
So we started the pilot, which really more about helping struggling readers in general, not necessarily dyslexia, but they get there. And they use the word, I believe, in the training. So getting the pilot passed, getting the extension passed. The other thing that another advocate from Pittsburgh and I did is we went to the Department of Transportation and asked them to produce an audio version of the driver's manual. And so we did that because I had a 16-year-old son. Well, actually, now that I take that back, he was like 19 when he was finally deciding to get his driver's license. And he refused to read that book. But he's the smart guy, and so he just kept taking the test and taking the test on the phone, right? But he still didn't know all the laws. so this other advocate, I just happened to have this conversation with her, and her name is Kathy Hartos, and she said, I've been tutoring a student for months with different little cars or manipulatives around learning how to drive. And so we got him in, and there's an audio version of it on that site. We're trying to get the commercial driver's license and the motorcycle one done as well, but they seem a little resistant to move in that direction. So we're working on that. I started the Dyslexia and Literacy Network to, again, try to get parents together, connect to each other, but also to raise awareness in all these different places that I think we really need to work on. And I started something else called the Literacy Coalition, which does a lot of, we'll be doing some work with SLPs and some similar to Pilot.
Are you doing anything to perhaps get an audio version of the procedural safeguards notice for parents?
No, but we can talk about it.
If you stop and you really think about it, it is not at all unusual that dyslexia is familial, and it would be very helpful if the parents had an alternative means to be able to know what their rights and their safeguards are.
And there's a lot of them, a lot of system technologies out there too that can read through those things, PDFs and things like that.
I just want to say we're responsible for all of the legal forms for the department on the patent website. All the forms are compliant with screen readers and text to speech. So you can take now I don't know that that's again administrator training, but if you take the procedural safeguards right now and you put it in any screen reader on your phone, it will work. And we actually pay big bucks to make sure every single thing is not just at the gold standard, but beyond for accessibility. So you should have no issues with that, but again, that's probably administrator training to let them know that it's totally accessible and it's been created for text to speech.
So I guess the one big piece I'm hoping to encourage everybody here is I think decoding dyslexia is about helping people help themselves. And I think that those of us that in here have done a lot of advocacy in different ways, but I certainly, I don't want it to seem, we were all just like, this isn't right, and started making some changes. And again, I encourage in Pennsylvania to look at what other states are doing. In Virginia, we have that module that I told you is available online that's identifying, putting into the teacher licensure, the definition of dyslexia. We also have a dyslexia advisor that we got a law that each district that has a reading specialist has to have a dyslexia advisor that can help you navigate. That information is all on the Department of Education website. These are my 3 top bills: was the module, so we can use the word dyslexia and everybody knows that they're not like that. That we have a dyslexia advisor that can help these teachers, that are supporting the teachers as much as the parents. I'm a big supporter of teachers person. The bill we got passed the year before last was for the reading specialists are not being trained out of the University of Virginia in dyslexia, so we changed the curriculum in the higher ed to include dyslexia in that. This year we have 5 bills. Currently, I've got a million texts I haven't read yet. We're trying to add a RAN, which is a rapid automatized naming, to our identification so we can better identify the students. UVA is freaking out about this because because you follow the money, and you will find that it is now privately owned by UVA, and if we change RAN, we are taking away the tool that they are paid to do. So that we're meeting a lot of opposition. We're trying to, in Virginia, I don't know if this is true in Pennsylvania, we have an advanced diploma that students can go for a standard or advanced, and one of the requirements for an advanced diploma is that you have foreign language. Well, as you can all imagine, 3 years of a foreign language is going to about take our kids out at the knees, so we're trying to get that opened up so that our very smart dyslexics can maybe get an advanced diploma, so we're offering computer science as a alternative to that, so we're looking at that. And then finally, we have Senator Vogel out of Northern Virginia is asking for a coalition with higher ed, kind of following what you're saying, that we would, using the science of reading, that SHEV, which is the group of higher ed, and we facilitate this meeting, there'll be a series of meetings to look at what is the evidence-based research that's needed for these teachers to be trained for our kids. So I'm just going to take 2 seconds to say the one thing. I think a lot of you, I'm seeing I gave bookmarks, but I stepped back after all this legislation that goes up and down and fails, and started thinking, like, where are the places that I went to before I even hit all this lobbying? And I went to my doctor, and I think pediatricians need to be connected, and I went to the library. I went to the library and said, my kid can't read, like, what do I do? And so I've now got the Dyslexia Friendly Libraries Virginia program, and if you go to the pqbd.org or dyslexiasymbol.com, there's a challenge of what this, it's a challenge for librarians to, it's about 2 hours long, where they take a simulation, they read some IDA fact sheets, they watch, there was an ABC news broadcast recently with the Pipeline to Prison conversation, and they watch that module they're gathering about. It's a pretty simple, it's all public information that's out there, and it's just packaged in a way that makes sense to librarians, and I would love to see other states look at doing this, and this would be a great place for your advocacy, is go to your public library and have a conversation with your librarian and say, maybe they don't know about dyslexia, they think the teachers are all trained with it, and the teachers think they're getting, I don't know, maybe the librarians are doing it, but I think having the librarians on board would be a big game changer as well.
Yeah, definitely something like that. So, first thing I can say is every single person in this room could help the advocacy effort by going to Decoding Dyslexia Pennsylvania's website and signing up. The ladies in blue over there have been working very, very hard. Everybody comes from an amazing, these are amazing group of women who have such diverse backgrounds, and it's awesome. We've all kind of figured out who we are and kind of how we can steamroll this through the various different venues. So we have a place for you. We have a seat at the table. Check out the website and sign up and help the movement forward. But in reference to me personally, some of the things that I've done that I think are interesting, kind of out of the box thinking, one of the things I do is I make sure that I volunteer for a number of different state level organizations. They're always looking for people. And when I volunteer for state level organizations, it gives me the opportunity to work in my own message. So I volunteer for PAECT, which is the Pennsylvania Association for Education, Communication, Technology. And that gets me the opportunity to meet once a month with 30 really dedicated educators, and I get to talk to them about dyslexia and slip that in constantly in my conversations, almost every single day. It also gives me access to a really cool public professional development thing where there's 100 educators, and I get to talk about dyslexia. Jen back there was one of my work campers, we call them, from last summer, and I got to tell her about dyslexia. So there's other organizations that I'm involved with that have nothing to do with dyslexia, but it gives me a seat at the table to have conversations with other people and influencers and decision makers that wouldn't otherwise know about dyslexia. So that's one way that I like to advocate, is to just kind of, get into other organizations. I started a Facebook group for my school district, and that has been really successful, because what I found in my district is that what happens in one elementary school is not necessarily happening in another elementary school, so it's nice to share secrets. Like, oh wait, I heard this program's at this school, why can't that go over there? It's a private group. They have to answer a very top secret question. The question is, do you have a dyslexic child in the district? And if they say yes, I let them in. Very high level. And then it gives us an opportunity to just kind of like talk and heal and come up with ideas and suggestions. So that's one way that you guys could advocate by, there's power in numbers. And then I go to the school board meetings by saying, I'm the founder of the Parents of Dyslexic Falcons, because that's our school app. We are a Facebook group, and we talk a lot about you. Only like 60 members, but they're like, whoa, there's a group? There's a group. And I'm speaking for them. That feels powerful. So then I get to go to school board meetings, and I talk to them about stuff as if I have this whole following behind me. So that's one way that you can advocate. The other thing is, do not underestimate the power of social media. Work on the way that you guys are packaging yourself on messaging yourself on social media. It's so fun to go on Facebook and just rant and be angry, but people don't then want to follow you. And I did that for a couple years. I was just angry about everything and was like, ah! And then I went back and I deleted all of it and I said, wow, I'm not getting anywhere. And then what I did was really just kind of repackage myself, and now I just make sure that my message is positive. So, I mean, I have about 1,000 followers on Twitter. I could use 100 more if you want to join up. That's at Hollywood24 on Twitter, at Hollywood24. It's an IE, I know it's surprising. But if you were to head on over and look at my Twitter account, what you'd see is that I have a lot of dyslexia posting, all very positive posts that I put up there, and I like to throughout the summer because I'm at home with my children. I don't want to spend time with them, so what I do is I put a dyslexia fact of the day up in the morning, and then people will tweet about it, and then I'll see them at random things like, "You're gonna be dyslexic?" Like, I'm like, I am. So those are different ways that you can just creatively advocate.
I think that it's really important that folks understand this divide that we've talked about between general ed and special ed. And I think that folks really need to understand that in most schools of education, that divide is still very, very, very much in place. I think it's really important that we think about the work, a lot of times parents come into advocacy around dyslexia because their child was struggling, and then they got in a Gillingham-based program or something, and they started to realize, wow, now my kid is reading, and they weren't able to read. But the principles, the scientifically based principles, what we know from the research and what the teachers were doing with your kid is grounded in research that all teachers need to know about kids and learning to read, regardless of whether or not they have subtype disability of dyslexia or reading comprehension issues. One of the things that people don't get is how fast, fluently you read, both prosodically, not just rate, but whether you read with expression and your rate is got like a 0.8 correlation with reading comprehension. Now, not for the kiddos that Dr. K was talking about, like kiddos in my brother's high functioning autism, so there's definitely some nuances with regards to that. But if you ask your average teacher who's been trained, for example, in assessments such as DIBELS, and they'll say, all we're doing is drilling kids and having them read fast, that means that teacher doesn't conceptually understand why we would be taking a screening measure to determine fluency. And it's not just did the kid read and did it note the punctuation, it's did the kid read with expression, and can they read at a rate that allows them to comprehend what they're reading. Teachers, when they rightfully, because they weren't trained, say, all we're doing is this drill and kill stuff and then we're measuring it, that shows they conceptually don't understand the science, okay? If you see teachers working with kids saying, yeah, they have us practicing these words that are pseudo words, they're not even real words, they don't even care whether or not kids comprehend the words, they just care that they know their sounds. No, we know that especially really bright kids, right, memorize one-syllable words and two-syllable words and high-frequency words, and by the time you're sitting down with your kids, and you're like, they can't sound this word out. They're just guessing. They're looking at the pictures. They've been taught these strategies where we're told to look to the end of the sentence, guess what it means, look at the picture. And oh, by the way, kids with average to above average functioning, intellectual functioning, they pick up on that, and it isn't until 3rd or 4th grade that you're like, holy cow, they can't read. They just memorized all the words. Why do we assess using nonsense words? Because then it's real clear whether or not kids have individual sound symbol correspondence, okay? But if you don't conceptually understand that, you would think what you were being asked to do is idiotic, right? No teacher wants to hurt kids. Teachers don't go into education to hurt kids. They want to make a difference. They haven't been trained. The schools of ed are not equipped. And if you just want to follow this, just put in Lucy Calkins and Columbia University right now in the School of Education and the work that's going on back and forth, fighting the research because it all gets back down to what money. So I will conclude with saying one thing we could do is we could have higher education adopt the International Dyslexia Association practice standards, which clearly identify what it is teachers need to know and be able to do when it comes to teaching kids to read. Now, they need to know and be able to do that for your kiddo who's dyslexic, but they need to know and be able to do that for all kids, okay? And they need to conceptually understand the science. So in order to do that, we need higher ed to be teaching these concepts. So we need to push for that to happen. Now, Pennsylvania's local control state, it's really difficult to move anything, but it really is important. If you want to advocate, let's get higher ed having these conversations, because they can't fight the science anymore. They can say, well, is the peer review research on Orton Gillingham as strong? Well, reading recovery had a higher rate and da-da-da-da. Forget that. They can't fight the underlying neuropsychological research that grounds. They might fight reading programs, but they can't fight the science that we know how kids learn to read. And so you wanna advocate for something, advocate for those practice standards to be embedded in higher ed and teacher prep programs. And last but not least, one of the things, come to Patent's website, look at our patent pod, which we are interviewing. We just did we had Alan Hanford on twice, we've had Louisa Motes. We do really, really succinct patent pods that are easy for parents to digest, teachers to digest, tons of resources. All the trainings from the dyslexia pilots are up there, all the PowerPoints, everything. You as a parent can go take anything you want. It's all open source on the website. And then last but not least, training and technical assistance for kids with supports around kids with disabilities. Pennsylvania has invested in the last 2 years $44 million a year in a project called PA Smart, with a huge focus. Patent is coordinating efforts on computer science for all, with a focus on kids with disabilities. And we know a lot of our dyslexic kiddos do really well. We're talking about foreign language, but do really, really well in computer science. So we have been building in Pennsylvania, and you'll be able to see it within the next 3 months, we'll have the first universally designed K-8 computer science curriculum posted on the patent website. And so when we say universal design for learning, it is geared with thinking about all kids from the beginning. So a student who's struggling and can't read the text, we have automatic supports in there for text-to-speech. So how do we universally design the curriculum? So Pennsylvania will have a K-8 universally designed curriculum. No one else in the country has it for computer science, with kids with disabilities being thought of as the first population to access it.
Okay, we have about 5 more minutes before we have to go back to Stayer, and we need to do the raffle before we do that. So I wanted to open it up for questions. While I'm bringing this over to you, I'm going to go get the raffle thing, so multitask.
Perfect.
Okay. Hello, I'm Yvonne from DDPA, and my question for the panel is, if you had to give like your elevator talk to your school district about what is the science behind reading, what is the quick down and dirty, instead of me giving them my entire dissertation, what would you tell parents that they should say is the science of learning?
Oh, that's what I was thinking. Am I allowed to answer? Okay.
So you're talking about, like, if you're at a school board meeting and you only have that 5-minute reading thing, like, how would you advocate for that?
Yep. How do you say this is a science of reading?
Yeah, essentially what we would talk about is we would discuss, teacher talk would be, best practices regarding the science, essentially of reading. What we would say is the neurology and the studies that have been conducted that show us how the brain responds to different types of learning. So a reading program that's only lighting up the left side of their brain versus a reading program that's hitting multiple parts. So that would, in layman's terms, how I've articulated it too. I just kind of like when you're doing like whole language stuff, there's 85% of the population that gets it on the left side, and it's really easy. You can kind of just throw books at them and they're going to learn it. And then I explain that there's the other part that needs the 4 different areas to light up. And that's what I'm trying to advocate for without getting too sciencey. And I've had some success with like business people to understand that.
Here's another thing. So a lot of times people on the other side of the reading divide will say reading is natural like speech, okay? Like learning to talk, okay? So what I would do is I would take a symbol from Chinese, right? And I would put it up there and ask them, what sound does this make? Okay? And they won't be able to tell you. And you need to say, listen, these squiggles, the orthographic pattern that represents our sounds are made up. It's made up. And once they start to realize that the reading programs we're giving kids is saying, guess at what this is, right? Or that this is a natural process, and just by being read to and being immersed in literature and language that kids are going to learn to read, it's inherently flawed. And anybody who, once they start to unpack that, they realize, really, yeah, this squiggle represents this sound. Someone made up this squiggle. If I don't teach a kid this squiggle and they don't know this is the letter A, they're not going to learn it. Now, some kids intuitively pick this stuff up, right? Because they've been immersed, but kids who struggle or kids who are going to have any kind of reading issues are not going to pick it up naturally. And that really has been helpful for me when I just, it's a no-brainer. This is a made-up orthography. It represents our sounds.
Thank you.
We need one more question, and then we'll go to next sessions. And if you want to continue the discussion, we can do that at 4 o'clock in the advocacy session.
Yes, my name's Lisa McBride, and I'm from Bucks County. And I have a question for all of you, but it's really anchored to what Angela mentioned and Daphne also mentioned. So in the higher education space, which I personally agree with you, is the place where we've got to really focus to help the teachers, because as a parent, and I'm here as a parent, I also tutor, I believe that's the teachers really do want to make a difference, just as Holly commented. But the question becomes, how do you influence those chairs, which is what Daphne opening remarks she had mentioned. And so the more that we understand how to influence this group of people, one, we've got to identify them across the state and all the schools that teach teachers. And two, we have to figure out how they network. And three, I think we really have to figure out what influences them. And not try to back them into a corner where they're going to ultimately fight back, but rather get them to come along naturally with the tide. So if you have a particular line of understanding on these individuals, I think it really could help us better go after this group.
So I'm desperately trying to do this. This is like my passion. We've been doing some projects that I'll stay silent on because these universities are pretty prominent here in Pennsylvania. But here's I think the general gist. When we think about teaching and learning, there's basically two major approaches to teaching and learning. There are behavioral approaches to teaching and learning, think B.F. Skinner, right? There are constructivist approaches to teaching and learning, right? Students own, that the goal of all learning is student ownership and initiation of their learning, right? So a lot of our whole language approaches basically say create environments that are conducive to learning, right? And kids will construct meaning. There are environments where that absolutely makes sense, like a science lab, right? Where you give kids specific things, they make a hypothesis, they have resources, and they're going to construct their meaning as they go. Now, some of our kids with disabilities need more scaffolds and supports to get there, but that's an approach to teaching. When we think about supports that we do for kids who are struggling or kids who need more, we fall more on the behavioral approach, explicit, systematic, direct instruction, right? And no one says you need to live here all the time, okay? So in the divide in higher ed, they're like, all they want to do in that special ed stuff is drill and kill, behavioral stuff, right? And the special ed folks are saying, they just assume kids have background knowledge and they don't ever provide them with the scaffolds. We have to show that the goal of teaching, first of all, the goal of all learning is that students own and initiate their own learning. That's the goal. Right? We don't want kids to have to do an I do, we do, you do, explicit systematic instruction for the rest of their life, right? The goal is ownership of their learning. But you have to also teach explicitly and systematically. I think that's where the connection is. Instead of fighting reading wars, we do this in autism, ABA versus, we do it in all of these educational fields. Instead of fighting that, talk about teaching and learning. And say, the goal of all learning is student ownership and initiation of their learning, constructing meaning, okay? But we sometimes have to systematically and explicitly teach. What we need teachers to know and be able to do is when to use what approach with whom based on data. And once you can start to make those connections, people can start to have productive conversations. But if you start fighting whole language versus reading, it doesn't go anywhere. If you back it up to teaching practices, then you can start to have some inroads. And that's what we've been doing a lot in some of our STEM work in Pennsylvania. And that's a big part of our work at Patton also now is coordinating STEM across the Commonwealth. And I think there's some really opportunities there.
Can I make a comment? I'll be really quick.
Oh, did we take your mic?
Oh. I think we all knew that was going to happen.
So I'll just say really quick, I agree with what Angela said, and I agree with Lisa, you can't back people into a corner. And if you have anybody's followed what's going on in Mississippi and by a woman named Kelly Butler with her foundation she works for, they've been doing a lot of work with the schools of higher ed. And one thing she said to me in a conversation was, these guys don't know the science, right? These chairs don't know the science either, and they need to find a safe place to learn it. And her foundation is providing that. And so I think we have to remember all that when we're talking about teachers or schools of higher ed. We're angry, we're upset, we're passionate, but we all have to give them space to hopefully come through it on their own, force them if we have to, but also provide them an opportunity to learn all these things so that they can get it as well.
Can I say one, and mine's 10 seconds. I just want to say from a parent perspective, just thank you all for being here because it doesn't really matter if you have the best teacher or the best program, if we lose these kids emotionally and to the anxiety. And so I'm just thrilled that thank you so much for having this conference and for doing this because we can't forget that huge piece of.
And as a chair in higher ed, I will tell you that chairs only schedule. What you really want to get in touch with are the deans. The deans are the ones who make changes, and what really influences them are PA state laws. So, it all comes around. So I don't have a lot of time for drama, because I want to get you back to the specific sessions. So raffle, can you pick me a winner? And thank you, Rebecca, for providing these wonderful raffle aspects. Joyce Anderson.